So if it's real or fake, Golden Greek told us the giant goon Dickov, El Toro, the Grunt Brothers too. The wild Samoans got something crazy going. They're gonna be going after you. Wrestling tonight. Everything is bigger than life. Wrestling tonight. Rock and roll and wrestling tonight.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Wrestling Tonight.
Yeah.
I am your host, Mad Dog Butch. With me, as always, the dangerous Danny Doring to my angry Amish roadkill, none other than Brace Beemer.
The hardcore host, Mad Dog Butch.
Yeah, that's not every day.
Not today.
No, not every day. Okay. So,
Maybe next week, folks.
Yeah, possibly. We'll see. We'll see what the topic is. But now, it's no secret that comic book related stuff right now is huge. You got a bunch of comic book movies in the theater right now, the main one being Avengers Endgame.
Is that crossing over to the regular comic book sales? The movies and, they're traditional?
I think it'll, like, pop it for a short time from what I understand,
Yeah.
but then it kind of dies back down.
Oh, okay.
From what I've been told. I haven't really followed it as much lately. Yeah. But either way, Avengers Endgame is breaking a bunch of records. The culmination of a long-term plan by Disney and Marvel Studios. Basically, the last 11 years, they've put out 22 different movies.
Dang.
And this is kind of the end of that whole storyline that they've built up.
Does this blow away the Star Wars franchise?
I
mean, forget the money because of the time period.
It kind of depends on how you break down the returns. Like, I know that Star Wars: The Force Awakens, I think domestically is still the number one movie as of right now, but the way that Avengers Endgame has been destroying records, I have a feeling it's going to beat that one. I think it's the worldwide one that Avatar has held since Avatar came out.
I can't believe that. I didn't think that movie was that good.
No, I didn't either. But I did not see it in the theater. I didn't see it till it came out. But either way, I mean, I guess visually it was supposed to be spectacular if you saw it in, like, IMAX at the theater. So
yeah,
not the same effect probably getting it on Blu-ray, but yeah, I mean, it was pretty cliche, I thought, when I finally saw it, and some of the acting was horrible. I thought the characters,
they're worse than John Paxson was.
Yeah, the characters were just, like, so cliche, and just
no depth.
Just exactly. But
a lot of actors are like that now. They just don't know any better, I guess.
Yeah, but anyway, not only that, last week, and I'm not sure how many years this has been going on, but for the last so many years, speaking of comic book stores or comic book sales, they do something called Free Comic Book Day, which has become sort of a big thing. What they do is the retailers will have certain comic books that they'll give away for free. And, there's quite a few companies that participate. It just happened to coincide with last week. Well, let me give a couple plugs first. Anybody in this area, go to Primetime Sports Cards if you're looking for comic books.
And we're in Lake Orion, Michigan, by the way, in case you're listening in Bangladesh or Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah. So Primetime Sports Cards is obviously in Lake Orion, Michigan. There's another one called Comic Explosion up in Lapeer that's pretty good, too. So normally, like, on Free Comic Book Day, I'll get my comic books from there. But last week, just kind of like out of the blue, we got a message from a comic book company that asked us to review a comic book that they've created, and it is called Invasion from Planet WrestleTopia, and the publishing company is Starburns Industries Press. And when I first got it, I thought that they were maybe a local company, but actually they're from Portland.
Yeah,
Were they
that's
from
correct.
Portland, Oregon?
Yeah.
So so I got that last week. So when I go into Free Comic Book Day, they actually had it looks like it's kind of like a compilation of the different Starburns comic book company titles. But in here is a short, kind of like excerpt from this comic book. But we got something from them asking us to review this comic. Now you weren't able to read the whole thing,
No.
but basically the gist of it is there's this character, and not write down all the characters' names, but there's this character, and I don't want to give too much away, but back in the late 90s, who's like the champion of this league, and the promoter's kind of jerking him around. So he kind of cuts this promo knowing that, and creates his own belt out of like a pizza box, and it was like Galaxy Pizza, and declares himself the galactic champion, says he can beat whatever. And so somebody in outer space years later actually gets the transmission and sends it to somebody, because they actually have this outer space. I mean, it's the very end of the comic, so they don't really get into that part, but there's a character named Manifest Destiny who is actually like the grand champion. So actually I really enjoyed this comic. And I was telling you before, it's similar to an idea that I had for a movie, because they always say, write what you know. Well, obviously I know pro wrestling, I know science fiction films.
And you definitely know comics.
Yeah. So my idea was kind of but I was focusing more on like a movie script. I wasn't even thinking of the comic book aspect of it. But yeah, so I could see this comic book going in a decent direction, where this guy is forced. Oh, so anyway, just one of the things. So this guy, it takes him like 15 years before they get the transmission. So after the guy gets fired, he's kind of doing the indie scene, and he's like a drunk and getting fired from promotion, pulling stunts. He kind of reminded me of when Jake the Snake Roberts, that's probably what they're basing it on, when Jake the Snake Roberts was on the Heroes of Wrestling pay-per-view, and he was all drunk, and he was, doing what he was doing with the snake. And so that's kind of what this character is now. So now I'm assuming these characters are going to come and challenge him or bring him to their battle arena or whatever. But anyway, yeah, there. I do have to say that there has been wrestling comic books in the past, and I'll just show a little bit of the artwork, a little bit more of the artwork here. But the artwork's decent.
I like the artwork.
Yeah,
I mean, really,
I like it.
what I read there is probably more than I've read of any other comic ever.
Really?
Yeah, because, I probably bought like a half dozen in my life, maybe 10.
Okay.
And I just really look at, a long time ago when I was a kid, like just look at the artwork, the pictures. And
Yeah. I mean, I do have to say, like I said, I don't know. There's Manifest Destiny right there. I don't really know much about this company. But yeah, the artwork is definitely comparable to a lot of the big titles out there. It kind of reminds me of, at one point, Deadpool got his own title, one of the first solo titles that he got, and it was more of a like cartoony type artwork, and that's kind of what it reminded me of. But
it's really well though, done well.
Yeah, and actually the story is done very well. There's a lot of like insider terms, but not too inside, and that's what I really liked about it, because it reminded me of like when WCW came out with like a comic, and it was just so forced, and it
I don't
was
even remember that.
Yeah, I want to say that was like early '90s, and it was I want to say Marvel did it, but I'm pretty sure it was Marvel that did it, and it was just like it's crazy. I mean, look it up, because people have done articles about it.
Oh, okay.
Like in the current time, looking back on it,
Yeah.
and just the moves that they were doing. I remember looking at it and being like, what are they even doing? You couldn't even tell. It was like these moves that you would never see in wrestling. It was It was just ridiculous. And then, throughout the years, there's been Mankind comics and Undertaker comics, and they play up more. They play, they kind of downplay the wrestling aspect of it and do more about their character, and it's the same thing. But yeah, I mean, there's even a wrestling bear part in this movie or in this comic, and
I read about that too. Like, you know, doing a little research on who these people are.
Yeah, so any comic book fans out there, definitely support the smaller, comic book companies. I mean, definitely support the big ones too. But if you're looking for something wrestling related, I mean, obviously, I only read the first comic, but I think that this could be a very decent comic storyline. So check it out. It's called Invasion from Planet WrestleTopia from Starburns Industries. And just real quick, it's co-written by, and I might butcher these names. If I do, I apologize. Written by Matt Enton and Ed, I can't even read my own writing, Kuno. The artist is Dan Schade. The colorist is Marissa Luis, and the letterer is Dave Lanefear. And they are all part of Suspicious Behavior Productions. Now.
Well, but before we go, I'm not really into comic books, and I saw 6 pages of that. I had technical issues. I needed permission to get to the drive to download it, but it's pretty cool. I mean, it's something a little different in my opinion. Yeah, I'm probably a person they'd want, people like me to go buy the comic that aren't like a hardcore enthusiast.
Yeah.
Just the way they have it set up and what they had in the preview here, it looks pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like I said, any wrestling based comic book that I think I've ever read, I've kind of been disappointed with because they don't really grasp and I've looked a little bit at their page, and they're definitely wrestling fans. And you can tell by reading it, and just the way that they have the characters interact and talk. And of course you got like an old school manager type and who's with him, but then you got the greasy promoter too. But yeah, it didn't feel like forced like a lot of the wrestling comics do. And I really enjoyed it. So I think I will continue to check this comic book out.
And I watched some of the interviews with the creators and the people who work on the comic.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can tell they're big fans. They're kind of along our vein. They know of the different territories and, know about them. Okay. And they seem like good chaps. So.
All right, cool. Yeah, definitely. If you're looking for something different, a decent wrestling comic book, although, with sci-fi elements in it, definitely check it out.
By all means, if I get access to that drive, I'll review it, and if I have a different opinion or a better or worse one, I'll kind of spend a minute on the next show.
Okay.
Kind of follow up on it.
Okay. Well, now this kind of leads us into what our main wrestling topic is going to be today, and some comics that I used to like to read as a kid were DC had a version, and they were called Elseworlds comics, but Marvel had What If comics. And
really?
Yeah. So basically what that was like, you'd have the main storyline, but then they would propose a question. Like, I remember I had one that said, what if, I think it was like Yellow Jacket might have died in the comics. What if Elektra had died in the comics? So it said, what if Elektra had lived? What would happen with like Daredevil and Bullseye? And then it also had, what if Yellow Jacket had died? But that's just one thing that I remember. But basically that's what it is. It's just like asking questions, and it would be a one-shot deal, like one comic book story of what if, obviously, something, not in the main storyline took place and what would have happened. So that's kind of what we're going to do today. Almost like a fantasy booking type thing too. So, I'm going to propose to you some what if scenarios, and you are going to return some to me.
Oh, okay.
So the first one that I want to ask you about is let's go back to the early 80s. And what would have happened, in your opinion, if Hulk Hogan would have actually beat Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA World Title?
That's what I have on my list too.
Do you?
Yeah. Um, I, I believe that. I think everything would have still worked out the way it did with McMahon kind of overrunning the shop, if you will, all the other territories. But I think that would have been delayed.
Okay.
I mean, had he stayed in there and been a lifer in the AWA, maybe a different story. But I think it was going to happen anyway, just because of the way the WWF Vince McMahon set that machine out, the way they were doing the promotion and the marketing and everything else. Because they had a lot of talent. They had Sergeant Slaughter, who at the time was arguably bigger than Hogan.
Right.
For a long time there.
Mm-hmm.
They had him. They had Jimmy Snuka, who was huge. And granted, he ran into his problems. But, they had some other guys that they could have relied on.
Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe they'll brought Billy Graham back.
Yeah, maybe. So who do you think they would have been forced to kind of go with?
Snuka at first.
I think so.
Yeah, I think it because he was so popular and over, and then maybe Slaughter after that. But at the beginning, Snuka was huge.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a monster. I remember thinking that at the time, because I was watching him before Hogan even got in there, and he was a monster.
Yeah. Yeah, I think even if that would have happened, you're right. I don't think it would have changed a whole lot besides maybe delaying it. Like you said, Vince Jr. already had the plans to go national. Vern would not have been able to compete, even if he put the title on Hogan.
Yeah.
I just don't think that he would have handled it correctly.
Maybe it, a what if Hogan did get over and he was over in AWA. He was huge.
Right.
And they had Hulkamania, the Hulkster, all that was Vern Gagne.
Yes.
So I'm going to tap the brakes for a second.
Okay. Let me clarify.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, as far as a title reign for Hulk goes, I don't know if Vern would have done it the correct way.
But that's what I'm saying. Maybe because he created all the other stuff, the Hogan comeback.
Right.
So what if Hogan did win the belt, which he was going to. They just did it the old school way where they kept teasing, Mm-hmm. So let's say he wins the belt. Maybe that changes the perception of Vern Gagne and the AWA. Because if you think about it, why was he there anyway? They had Ventura, they had superstar Billy Graham, they had Hogan. None of those guys could really wrestle per se, but here they were. Right. And then Gagne wanted Hogan to be a Billy Graham, just in his own mold. So maybe there are 3 or 4 big companies instead of 23 territories.
I mean, let's go back to that era too. I mean, AWA had the Road Warriors.
Yeah.
When I first started watching, I mean, obviously WWF was kind of the bigger topic, but people in the beginning were talking about the wrestlers that AWA had,
right,
just as much. Yeah. AWA, I think, probably even beat WWF to the punch as far as releasing videotapes.
Oh, sure.
It was right around the same time that the LJN figures came out, but I want to say AWA was first.
They were Remco
with the Remco AWA action figures.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah.
So they had the Freebirds in there. They had, they had a lot of people. Rick Martel. Well, no, that was before Martel, right? Or was Martel still in there? But that was just before he got the push.
Martel. Well, he had the belt in '84, so.
Anyway, right around that time. It would have been interesting, like you say. I kind of agree with you. I don't think ultimately it would have changed much, but who knows?
Yeah. The best case scenario is you just have it would have hastened the demise of the territories and had just bigger companies.
Yeah. All right, you want to throw one out there?
Yeah. How about because a lot of them that I did were actually, they're more like television related.
Okay.
Well,
Well, I mean, television kind of steered the way. So,
Yeah.
I was kind of trying to think of stuff that kind of made things go in a different direction too. So,
Yeah. Okay. Well, how about this one? This is a pretty popular topic. What if Dr. D. David Schultz, and this goes back to the mid '80s, what if Dr. D did not slap John Stossel on 2020?
excellent
What
question.
do you think would have happened?
Excellent question. A lot of people may not realize this, and if they don't, go out there and look for it. We could have had a Stone Cold Steve Austin character years and years and years before Stone Cold Steve Austin, because they were already trying to build him up that way. Although he would have been a heel. I mean, back then he would have been a heel. I don't think he would have got over as a babyface like Stone Cold did later, because everything was kind of changing. The quote shades of gray, and but who knows? I mean, he might have done like a big heel run and then eventually turned babyface. But yeah, people, if anybody's not familiar, look it up on YouTube, and they were doing vignettes with Dr. D at home.
Awesome.
Yeah, like he was just this redneck at home. He's yelling at his kids.
Yeah,
He's
his wife.
and his wife, and just kind of like living in a not a
Just out in the woods.
just kind of like living in the backwoods, and so yeah, that obviously they were building him towards Hogan. I mean, he was already kind of wrestling Hogan, but I think that would have even made that more of a bigger event when he got shots at
heck yeah.
at Hogan. Unfortunately, that was the beginning of Hogan's run, so I don't think that Dr. D would have won the belt or anything, but I think that because it was almost like, well, actually they started giving Piper the big heel push after the whole Dr. D thing, right?
Right. But Piper was going to go that way anyway.
Yeah. So Piper kind of stepped up, took Dr. D's place, but at that time, Dr. D looked like he was going to be the number one heel.
Yeah, it seemed like it.
And I've seen a few matches with Hogan and Dr. D from that era, maybe a couple, but definitely good matches. I would have loved to have seen that.
Yeah, they had matches in the AWA too.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. So that kind of carried over too.
With Dr. D, I mean the vignettes and everything else, I think he would have been, because he got the shots at Hogan. He helped Piper and Orndorff. They booked him in to help beat Hogan up. He could have been a guy like a Jake the Snake, like a $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase.
Yeah.
Who was just always right under the top, and every once in a while they do an angle where they could get the title shot, but pretty much that number two.
Randy Macho Man Savage before he finally got to take it to the next level.
Yeah, and I thought of him, but he was just a little different,
Yeah.
But yeah, like the same concept. The guys getting the other wrestlers ready for Hogan. Yeah, he could have been on there, and they could have done more skits with him in vignettes, because he was.
Yeah.
I mean, and he was good at them too.
Oh yeah,
because he took them for
great.
real. It's not like the guys now just memorizing stuff. It's, well, here I am.
Yeah, I mean, who knows about Dr. D back then? I mean, I've heard recent interviews with him, and everybody said that he's matured and calmed down over the years, but
I think a lot of that,
but it sounds
kind
like
of fables anyway.
Well, it could be, but I mean, anytime you saw him, I mean, even on stuff. Well, I mean, there was the famous pro wrestling episode of the Morton Downey Jr. show, and Dr. D was already done wrestling at that point. He was a bounty hunter, and he acted exactly the same way.
Yeah, he was acting. I mean, like part of the show.
I don't know,
because I've heard opposite, like other people that have said, he's not like that in real life. I even heard a bunch of interviews of him saying that's just a, he'll whoop somebody's butt.
Don't ruin it for me. There's there's a few things that I still want to.
But
believe
he still is a tough guy.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. He wasn't
right.
Kissing babies and shaking hands and all that. But yeah, he wasn't like a jerk like he was made out to be.
Yeah. All right. Let me throw another one out.
Dr. D. David Schultz.
What do you think would have happened if Vince Sr. did not sell the WWF to Vince Jr.?
Ah, nice. That's a good one. Had he stayed alive, I mean, you know, because there's a.
Well, no. I mean, I was thinking more along the lines of him selling it to someone else.
Oh, okay. Oh, so Junior didn't get the bite out of the apple.
Right.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think of that one. I think there still would have been a territory system for another 5 years, 6 years, another stronger one. Because a lot of that, there are already other groups that tried to go national. You know, I mean, there had been, I wrote them down because that's my kind of train of thought. I think another 5 years, the territories would have held on, but it kind of would have been, I keep going back to this, you know, super regional territory scenario where you have, you know, like 4 or 5 regions that pretty much like run everything. And you almost kind of did with WWF New York, AWA, and the whole Midwest. And
yeah.
But yeah, I also believe there wouldn't have been a Hulk Hogan. It would have been a different presentation.
Yeah.
Even though he had superstar Graham, but you know, you never turned Graham into a good guy.
Right.
Kind of gave away one of my things here. But yeah, I'm going to stick with that. If there wouldn't have been a Hogan, there would have been a Hogan, but not like it was. And I think that would have allowed the territory system to stay more intact for, I don't know, probably another 5 years, maybe even longer.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, I didn't really give much thought to who would have been maybe next in line to, or who would have even wanted it. But, I mean, I'm sure somebody would have wanted it. I'm sure a lot of people would have wanted it.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, everybody blames Vince because he was the one to do it, Vince Jr., because he was the one to kind of shun the old territory handshake agreement deal and go with the national expansion. But you talk to all those, or you listen to all those old school guys now, and they're like, it doesn't matter. Somebody would have did that eventually.
Yeah.
Anyway.
People had already tried.
So, right.
You know?
Yeah.
He was successful at it.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I guess it would have depended on who would have taken it over from Vince Sr. As far as who they would have made their champions.
Yeah.
You know, because everybody had their own idea of what a champion should be at that time.
And you look at traditionally in that market, you know, their champions were just different than, you know, the NWA champion, you know, the WWF champion. They're just cut from a different cloth.
Right.
You know, there wasn't heat. You know, you hear me say that both of us all the time. You know, they don't do heat. It's just a completely different style.
Yeah. I mean, and also let's say this, for a long time, besides a couple people, like besides Backlund and maybe Graham, and even Buddy Rogers, but it seemed like they really liked the more, quote, ethnic babyface back in Vince Sr.'s era.
Yeah.
Like you had Bruno, you had Pedro Morales.
But he had
A
Backlund,
lot
too.
of the other top guys. Well, yeah, I know. I threw Backlund out there as the exception. But yeah, I mean, like I said, it would have just depended on who Vince Sr. would have sold it to. And maybe it would have just been status quo. Maybe they would have just kept churning it out the same way that the WWF had been doing for years. Maybe they would have just kept following the same mold.
We should get Vince McMahon Jr. on the show and see if he can give us any insight to where his dad was going, you know.
Yeah.
Because he booked a year and a half out.
Right.
So there would have been at least some traces of what was in his mind.
Yeah.
Well, didn't he say...
they might have brought Bruno back.
They
Vince
did.
Jr. did. Yeah, that's true.
But Vince McMahon Sr. called a bunch of his buddies that ran the other territories, you know, their little mafia syndicate deal, and kind of warned them that his son, Vince McMahon Jr., was going to go national. So,
right.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have another what if scenario?
Yeah, how about, because some of these are older, and I'm trying to find one that maybe more people would identify with. Okay, how about this one? This is a little different. How about if the Mid-South UWF was able to stay on WTBS during the time when McMahon and the WWF got the time slot away from Georgia Championship Wrestling? What if UWF were able to stay on TBS and also get that 6:05 time slot?
Yeah, that would have been interesting. And my next question is actually a UWF related question as well.
Sweet.
It's not exactly the same as yours, but
Well, let's make it a kind of a block topic then.
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, at the time, would most casual fans have looked at NWA and Mid South as being that different?
Well, I'm talking Mid-South being there instead of the Georgia, the Mid-Atlantic, WCW,
Oh,
and
instead
WWF.
of all that?
Yeah, because they were in line for it. What happened was McMahon bought the time slot, and the Turner people and Ted Turner didn't like it because they wanted original programming.
Right.
And so Jim Barnett, who brokered the deal to get WWF on, brokered another deal to get WWF bought out and brought the Mid-Atlantic group in, which in turn became WCW with Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair,
Right.
Jim Crockett, and all that.
Okay.
And when they did that, Mid-South had a show on at 11 in the morning.
Yeah.
And in order to get that 6:05 time slot filled, Barnett and WCW and Turner said, "Okay, we don't need UWF anymore."
Okay.
So that's how they got off. But UWF was gonna take that 6:05 time slot
Okay.
until Barnett interjected. Barnett, what a weasel! Brokered a deal to get Georgia Championship Wrestling off. Brokered a deal to bring WWF in. Brokered the deal to bring.
Yeah.
He's like his own merger and acquisition company.
Yeah. Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. I don't know about that.
They were the highest when UWF was on in the morning. They were the highest rated show on TBS.
Because I've told you before, like when I first started watching it, I mean, I know that I saw Mid South. I didn't
Yeah.
know the difference between them.
Yeah.
But I know I saw Georgia. I know I saw Mid South. And then I think I probably watched WWF, kind of exclusively for a while, and then went back to the NWA on WTBS. But yeah, I mean, that would have been great for me because, I mean, I loved the NWA, but I really liked the way that Mid South / UWF later did things.
Yeah. I do too. I like them better.
Yeah, I mean the show just moved a little bit better. The way the angles played out, I thought were a little bit better. I mean, it was just like a little bit different, but yeah, the yeah, I don't know, that would have been interesting to see if they could have stayed up there.
I think they would have.
As far and given the WWF some real competition. I mean, there were times where the NWA were still. I mean, they were still considered their main competition, but yeah, maybe if it would have been Mid South and then UWF later, they would actually have given WWF a real run for their money.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's and that's where the term hardcore wrestling fan really kind of came from. I mean, that was like a totally different deal than what the WWF was presenting. I mean, NWA somewhat, but Mid South really was
They
presenting
presented it like a
something
sport.
different. Yes.
Yeah.
And hardcore has got changed around as far as
Bastardized.
wrestling. Yeah. Now when somebody says hardcore, it's they think of nothing but blood and hitting each other with
Bottles and tables.
tables and chairs and whatever. But yeah, that would have been been interesting to see.
I believe
what would have happened with that.
I believe they would have done a lot better than what, the formerly WCW Mid-Atlantic and Turner did.
Think so?
Just because, like, when they were on and syndicated in Chicago, when they were the UWF,
Yeah.
they had the highest. They blew everybody away. Any wrestling show that happened.
Well, let me.
There's a whole Midwest in.
So that brings me to my next one, and it was, what if the UWF were not kind of forced to sell to the NWA?
Well, they could have. I think they would have. They would have hung around in syndication. I mean, it was a little expensive. They would have had to start following their television show, which I think they would have done well. Like, had they gone to Chicago between, the Midwest, stayed in the Midwest area, and maybe Texas, stayed in their home territory, went over to Chicago, St. Louis, they could have built some momentum because they were so popular, west of here. They would have had to been successful. And I think the money with the syndication, how much it cost and the way the business was changing, that they just didn't have enough capital in it to keep it going.
Yeah.
They kind of expanded, and one of the deals where you expand quick and all of a sudden the bills are piling up and you go, whoops.
Right.
But yeah, I think they would have been around, and, almost another scenario where you could have just had, 3 or 4 big regional territories to work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the same thing because it seems like UWF had a lot of momentum at the time. And then, there's a lot of different things that get blamed for UWF's demise.
Yeah.
I think NWA really dropped the ball with what they did with UWF, absorbing UWF.
Dusty,
they could have
Dusty admitted it.
Yeah. I mean, that if they would have done a UWF quote invasion angle or something like that back then, I mean, that would have been huge.
Yeah.
Like no one had ever done that before. No one had ever really seen anything like as that type of scale. I mean, they just kind of absorbed those guys and then kind of phased out most of them, and then they took a couple guys and pushed them like Sting and Rick Steiner, but
Yeah.
but most of the guys got phased out, unfortunately.
They should have just left it 2 different areas. Kept.
Yeah, they could have done that
because
too.
they were making money hand over fist.
Yeah.
I mean, they were still making money even when the oil crisis hit. Texas, Oklahoma, and whatever. They were still making money.
Yeah. And what a scam that Bill Watts pulled to get Jim Crockett to buy them.
Yeah.
Because
Jim Ross brokered that deal.
Because to use as leverage, he told them that that WWF was interested in buying him, but WWF really had no interest in buying him.
Yeah.
I can't remember if WWF knew that they were about to go under. I can't remember if that was part of it or not. But either way, WWF had no interest in buying him. But that's what he used for leverage. So Crockett bought him. So WWF couldn't get him. And then it turned out that wasn't the case. But anyway, they didn't end up doing anything with him anyway.
Yeah.
Really? Well, I mean, I guess you get Sting out of it and Steiner and maybe a couple other guys. But overall, even if it would have gone under, they could have just picked those guys up anyway.
Right. It's like, why did they buy him anyway? That's
right. And it's not like they used the UWF name after a certain point.
Yeah.
Oh, they picked up Dr. Death too. I should mention that. He was the champion. They did kind of use Doc somewhat.
Yeah. But he had his eyes on Japan too, so.
Right. Yeah. So go ahead and ask another one.
Okay. What about what if World Class Championship Wrestling followed their TV show, their syndicated TV show? And granted, they had something on, well, really syndicated and ESPN. What if WCW had followed, like went out and came to New York and ran a card?
WCW or WCCW?
WCCW, World Class Championship Wrestling, like the Von Erichs, Texas Sportatorium.
Yeah, that probably would have been huge.
Yeah.
I think they could have done very well. And the kids were trying to get Fritz to do that.
Yeah.
But he was, from the old school, so he didn't really see a need to do that.
Yeah,
But
his
then again,
bookers were too. You know.
yeah, they were all kind of encouraging him, and I think that would have been a big deal.
Yeah.
Because I mean, everybody knew the Von Erichs.
How over do you think the Von Erichs would have been?
I think that they still would have been over, even in other territories besides Texas. Maybe not in some. I mean, I don't know. If they would have came to Detroit? Do you think they would have been over in Detroit?
Well, they would have had them marketed toward Detroit first, with the promos and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
probably not right away. It would have taken some time because, with Kerry Von Erich, the girls were gonna with Kevin Von Erich, the girls were gonna show up, so the guys were gonna show up.
Yeah.
I mean, that was gonna happen. They were gonna get over, but just like to what level and how quick.
Well, here's the thing, though. I mean, if let's say they would have started doing shows and done shows pretty regularly there, and the Von Erichs were getting shoved down everybody's throat, there might have been a backlash from the Detroit fans eventually.
Yeah, there could have been. I mean, I could see where like a Gino Hernandez would be popular here, like a Ventura or a Savage.
Oh yeah,
it would have worked because the wrestling that we had here, and even going back into the 70s, was everything that I've seen. It's just kind of bad. It really wasn't all that good.
Right.
And you bring those guys with that style. I mean, very snug. They beat the crap out of each other.
Yeah.
And
they've gone on
were
record.
pretty exciting matches, especially watching them back now.
Yeah.
Had a different presentation, and they could have been okay.
Right. WCCW really doesn't get a lot of credit for being, as far as production value goes, it's being kind of ahead of the curve there. Yeah. I mean, I know they've talked about it if you watch like the documentaries and stuff, but I didn't think of it that back then, really. But looking back now, you could see how innovative they really were.
Yeah. You don't think of it on that scale, but you saw everything, you heard it, you knew it was different.
Yeah.
They had the cameras in the ring.
Yeah.
You could hear everything.
Right. I mean, my big knock was the Von Erichs getting shoved down everybody's throat. But you had to do what you had to do back then.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like they were the ones selling the tickets, so you had to do it that way.
I just think they needed more excitement in their commentary. I was a firm believer in that,
Yeah, I agree. They should have got some. I was just thinking that too because, I mentioned this before. When I would go back and watch the Legends of World Class Championship Wrestling, I'd immediately be asleep within 5 or 10 minutes.
I tried watching one a couple months ago, and I was like, boom, went right out.
Yeah.
Well,
So
how do you think Hernandez and Adams would have fared, kind of in the different territories? Because they would have went to New York first. They had huge ratings there.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think they would have done great.
They had big ratings a lot of places.
And I mean, that's one of the questions that I had. I was going to get into like the Viceland Dark Side of the Ring stuff.
Oh,
so
okay.
so I actually have Gino Hernandez on here as one of my questions. What would he have done in the business had he not died? So I don't know. Would he have stayed with World Class Championship Wrestling, or would somebody have poached him? I have a feeling that WCW, NWA, or even WWF would have like offered him
He was going somewhere.
big money. Yeah,
It just depended on him mentally. Had he not died, had he not been in the state that he was in, the trouble, then maybe he would have traveled more. But he was very comfortable down there in Texas with the Houston gig, the World Class gig, the
Right.
San Antonio,
Right.
Southeastern.
Now,
Yeah, he would have been huge. They wanted him in WC or Mid Atlantic for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and he didn't go.
I'm going to even go as far as to say that he could have been a replacement for Ole Anderson as one of the Four Horsemen if he would have gone and wrestled in that territory.
Yeah, he could have.
I mean, he would have definitely.
It was too much,
fit the bill.
too similar to.
To Rick.
Yeah.
Well, they probably would have changed it up a little bit.
Yeah.
I think if he would have gone it. Well, I don't know. He was more like Tully to me.
Yeah.
Than Rick.
Which is the
But he was
original dynamic duo, Tully
Right.
and
Yes.
Gino.
Yeah. Exactly.
Maybe we should do a top 10 on wrestlers named Gene or Gino.
Now, just throwing this out there, what do you think of the rumor that Gino Hernandez was actually Paul Bosch's kid?
That's not true.
Okay.
Yeah, he was the son. Now I can't remember the guy's name.
But he was not. He was not his legitimate son. He was his. He was like his stepson or something. He was not his son.
Not whose son?
Hernandez, the other Hernandez. Is that who you're?
Oh, yeah, because that's what Pritchard and some other guys down there said, that was his son and not Paul Bosch. That was a.
I just saw something and he
really.
Yeah, and
Huh.
he is not.
The mystery continues with that guy.
Yeah, I mean he was. That's the name that he used, and that's what they promoted him as.
Yeah.
But he was not his actual son.
Huh.
He was like his stepson or something.
Because he looked nothing like Paul Bosch at all.
No.
You know, not even the younger Paul Bosch didn't look like him at all. So I never, for whatever reason, I never believed that. And then I started to hear other stories. I don't believe it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
maybe
I didn't
there's
really
some
look
other
into
guy
it a
out
whole
there
lot, but-
that's his dad, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what it sounds like.
Oh,
but
okay.
but I mean, I've just seen that rumor recently out there, and a lot of people talking about it because of the way that Paul Bosch took care of
Yeah.
Gino.
But he took care of his mom, and, you know, his
Right.
mom was friendly with him. So,
Right. So that's why. I mean, that's why that's out there.
Yeah.
That's why that theory is.
and
out there.
beside that, a lot of people get jealous. Look at the way they talk about, like, Lawler and Jarrett in some of the smaller territories, how they dog them.
Yeah.
You know, just the guy was good. He made a lot of money early, and hey, the crowd showed up. He deserved it, and that rubs a lot of people the wrong way. Kind of like if you're at work, you've been there for 15 years, and some schmuck comes in and, like, you know,
Right.
the same deal.
Yeah. That's true.
Well, while we're on Gino, when is that?
And Gino Brito would be number one, by the way.
Yeah. While we're on Gino Hernandez, that's the next Viceland show. Let's talk a little bit about that show, because
Oh, actually, I have like all of those listed. Not every one of
okay.
them that's coming up, but that's what I was going to get to eventually anyway.
okay, all right, cool.
So I have not actually watched any of these yet, but I did recently buy a Bruiser Brody documentary that was produced, I think, by his ex.
Really?
So yeah,
Huh.
yeah. So I mean, it's pretty
Barbara Goodish.
much. Yeah. So it's pretty much. I mean, I'm sure you've seen pretty much all the same stuff. I mean, Tony Atlas is on there too.
Yeah.
So I haven't watched it yet, but one guy that at least so far, and if people don't know what we're talking about, there's a show on Viceland.
Yeah.
And what is that? A cable station or something?
Yeah, it's cable.
Okay, called Dark Side of the Ring, and I think they've done 4 episodes so far.
That's correct.
So I wrote down ones that are more relevant to this topic, but I have not seen that they're going to cover this guy. But one of my what if questions for you is, what if Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert had not died? What role would he have played? Because he died a couple years before the whole Monday Night War era.
Yeah, he died in 80 or
It was like 92, I thought, or 93.
4 maybe.
Okay, either way,
Yeah.
it was like right before the Monday Night War era, right before the new era of ECW. I mean, he was there in the early days of ECW. But where do you think he would have landed? And do you think he would have had a backstage role in one of the companies?
I think he would have had a backstage role. I'm just not sure about the impact. Yeah, you know, working, because
I mean, let me put it this way, especially ECW. But then WWE picks up kind of what ECW is doing. They kind of
Yeah.
start following their mold. WCW
and the Memphis mold.
tries to do it too, right? And you know, Gilbert had been doing that on the indies in the smaller scale for
Yeah.
a long time, and that's kind of how he booked. Like if you remember, like the era of Continental that him and Paul Heyman did, you know, that was kind of tailor made, I think, for the Monday Night era. I think that was ahead of his time, and so that's why I kind of think that
You're right.
he would have had some role, probably more behind the scenes than he would have in the ring.
Yeah, definitely. He was always, you know, I'm gonna change what I said earlier. I think he would have made a difference. You know, just because of that background, that you just kind of changed my mind on that. Butch, good job. Wrestling wise, I think he was kind of I don't think he was really that great in the ring, and probably because he once I started to see a lot of Lawler, I saw that it was kind of just over the top. So I don't think his mind translated in the ring as well as it did behind the scenes.
Okay.
But yeah, I could see. Yeah, after that, he could have definitely been a writer or producer for WWF or hell, even WCW. I could see that. If he didn't have his problems and his issues and whatever else, then yeah, he could have maybe gone on his own and started something.
Now, if he would have gone back to ECW, I could have seen him being used as kind of a main heel in there.
Yeah.
And not necessarily behind the scenes, but if he would have gone to WWE at the time, they probably would have used him more behind the scenes. But for whatever reason, I picture him being put into their fledgling light heavyweight division, which actually
he was too good of a heel for that, though. He was a good heel.
Well, I guess you really wouldn't need him because you had Brian Christopher.
Yeah, Eddie Gilbert, one of the talents, and really like a lot of people in the business, the people that were around him say he had a brilliant mind. So yeah, he would have had to make a difference.
Yeah,
and I would have liked to seen that on his own, because you saw what he wound up doing in the Independence, which is the gore and the blood and the guts, and I didn't like that look for him. I didn't like his matches with it. I didn't think they really came off that well.
Yeah.
But from going to the more traditional wrestling style, he would have shined there. That would have been a perfect spot for him.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think that he definitely, one way or the other, could have contributed heavily to the Monday Night War era.
Oh, heck yeah. Even if it was being a thorn in his side with a different group,
Yeah, exactly. Right. All right. Who's your next?
All right.
What's your next question?
Okay. This is okay. How about this?
And we'll go back to the Viceland people too.
Okay.
But
how about this? This is a little older school WWF. We kind of touched on it earlier. What if the WWF, Vince McMahon Sr. and Jr. at the time, turned superstar Billy Graham into a good guy? What would have happened later on? Would there have been like a Hogan? How would that all work?
Like what era are we?
Late 70s,
talking?
early 80s.
Well, yeah. I mean, there is the rumor out there too that that Billy Graham was being looked at to be Thunderlips in Rocky as well.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So
I could see it. He had the,
Yeah, so let's couple that together. Let's say Billy Graham gets the role of Thunderlips in Rocky.
Yeah.
Turns into a babyface in WWF in the early 80s. I don't know. I mean, as far as wrestling goes, his body, I don't know if you remember, but his body kind of like, I think that's when it started to break down almost because instead of doing like the regular like big muscle guy, he'd lost all that muscle. I can't remember exactly what happened, but then he came back as the karate guy.
Yeah.
He started doing the karate gimmick, and his body was like
we got off the gas.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it was.
Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe he would have stayed on that, and but I don't know. I mean,
well, how do you think?
I like Billy Graham. He was a good wrestler, but I just don't think that as far as his matches go. I don't know. I don't know if it would have fit that mold.
Well, let me reword it, because I was thinking more as a transition into like the mid '80s product that WWF had. Because
would they eventually bring Hogan in?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of where I was going. Like my thought would, hell, they turned him good, they would have drawn a crap load more money. I mean, everybody wanted that guy to be a good guy, even all the other workers.
Yeah.
So. I mean, he could have been the good guy, and they could have had a huge blow off with Hogan. Kind of like passing the torch gimmick.
Right.
Because Hogan, he says he patterns himself right after superstar Billy Graham.
Right.
Hell, and that's what Vern wanted in the AWA. Give me superstar Billy Graham in your own words.
Right. Yeah.
So that could have been like a huge like stadium show, because they hadn't done like a Shea Stadium show since Bruno and Zbyszko.
Yeah.
Hogan fought Andre on that show, but
right.
that's kind of what I pictured. It was them just hell, that could have made the expansion a lot quicker had they had Graham a good guy.
Yeah, yeah, that's possible. I mean, I unfortunately, I mean, I've seen enough of Billy Graham from back in the era, but growing up, it was already after the karate era, and I mean, he built his body back up, but his hips were kind of giving out, and then by the time he went to WWF,
oh yeah,
he was pretty much done as far as wrestling goes. So I'm kind of more familiar with that era of him. So it's hard to say because so many people kind of, like you said, kind of followed suit with him, kind of copied him, and so I don't know. It's that's a tough one.
Yeah, I could have seen box office because you
Yeah.
got to figure if he doesn't get out of the daily grind, he kind of maintains himself.
Yeah.
And I think in the scenario, we're not asking him to go through the Hulkamania era, but maybe up to 83, 84
Yeah.
when they finally brought Hogan in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or in permanently instead of just, bringing
Right.
in for a couple matches.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting scenario. And like you said, heel Hogan and babyface superstar Billy Graham, that could have definitely made some money.
Yeah. Or even have Graham be the good guy and turn on Hogan and get Hogan going.
Yeah.
Because that probably would have worked better than having the Iron Sheik. And you know how good that worked.
Right.
I mean, a lot of that was just Hogan but yeah, that could have been good.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. All right. Before we get back to the Viceland stuff, let me throw this one out at you.
All right.
This is like a little bit more of the modern era, but what if WWF did not hire Vince Russo to be the main writer in the 90s? Because let's go back to that era. WCW decides to go head to head with WWF. I remember you and I talking about it when that was proposed, and we laughed it off, thinking that it was just going to piss Vince off, and Vince was going to just grind them into the dirt,
Which he did eventually.
but it as much as I hate Vince Russo, you got to give him credit.
Yeah, I think I look at it like he just happened to be there and threw 1,000 ideas up, and a couple of them stuck because a lot of it was bad.
It was really bad.
It was
really bad.
Yeah.
I hated that. I honestly, people are surprised when I tell them how much I hate that era, but there's a reason for it. I just thought it was like some of the most, they were pandering to the lowest common denominator.
Jerry Springer.
The Jerry Springer stuff. Right, exactly.
But their main events were great.
Yeah, the main event stuff was still good. The mid card and lower card stuff was crap.
Yeah.
Vince Russo has gone on record and said, you don't have to have, I can't do a Vince Russo imitation, but you don't have to have a 4-star match every time. He didn't care about the in-ring product. And I've said this before. I think that that he was heavily influenced by David McLean's Glow. I think that's where he got most of his booking ideas from. But I digress. What do you think?
Had he not shown up,
one thing that I should throw out there is a lot of people might not know where he came from. He was actually the writer under a pen name, Vic Venom, for the WWF magazine. So that's what he was doing. Like his column was kind of like what we're doing, but more like fantasy booking style. And he was doing more like adult storyline stuff. And that's what the story is, that Vince comes in one day with his team and is like, this is what we should be doing.
Yeah, and before that, he worked at a video store. Had Vince Vince Russo not shown up, I believe they probably would have pounded the WCW a couple years quicker. I believe so, because you had Cornette, you had some other guys there.
Yeah, but if you watched that era, if you turn on WCW, then you turn on WWF.
Yeah.
WWF looked like it was going in slow motion. You had you had like you got it on WCW, and it's, let's say you got Chris Benoit versus Eddie Guerrero.
Yeah.
Then you turn it on WWF, and it looks like it's going in slow motion because you got the Godwins versus the Guns.
Yeah,
the
which
Smoking
Godwins
Guns.
could work, but
They could, but it was just the whole presentation at the time, and they were still. This was before WWF decided to go live every week, so I mean that definitely I think played a role. In
yeah.
it. But
I think he gave him an idea, like a mindset, and you got to give him, okay, I give him credit for that, for being more edgy, but I think the farther it went, the worse it got, and I just,
I agree with you. But at the time, that
it
also
was over.
That also equaled ratings.
yeah.
I think a lot of people just watched it, because that kind of brought. I mean, the ratings were crazy back then.
Yeah, that's
if
a
you
tough
really
one.
go back and look at it.
Oh, yeah, they get like a 1-3 now, and
Yeah,
1-3 back then, and somebody was being fired after it dropped down to a 3.
Yeah, and I will say this: the WWF, or at least the stories that I've read in the past couple of weeks, is WWE's in panic mode because the ratings for Raw and SmackDown are some of the worst they've ever been. Right?
Good, it serves them right, and I hope they get on Fox, and it falls on their face so they can just go away, get wiped off of the face of the earth. I mean, I hate to say that for the jobs and everything, but from a wrestling perspective, as a fan, that's why I don't watch it.
But okay, back to the Vince Russo era though. That was probably the closest it's ever been to going out of business.
yeah, yeah,
So a lot of people cite Russo and Russo's quote vision for kind of bringing him out of that.
yeah, and I could agree with that. So if you hadn't showed up, I don't know, maybe there's more competition. Maybe they don't go the hard, the adult themed route.
So what would they?
But they copied off WCW doing that anyway. So
How so?
well, WCW had more. They had a lot more edge in what they were doing with like the NWO and all that other stuff.
Yeah, but it didn't go to that level. I mean,
They took it to another level.
If
but
anything, I think that Russo was borrowing more from ECW
sure,
than WCW at the
sure.
time.
But there was an edge out there in wrestling, before the WWE started really kicking it in high gear.
Right.
So, yeah, maybe they don't put WCW out of business. Well, maybe they do it just a couple years later.
Eventually, I don't know. I mean, eventually something would have came along, I'm sure,
Yeah.
that would have.
So I'm struggling with this one. This one's kind of tough
I mean,
because I hate Russo so much.
yeah, I know.
I dislike.
But it just seemed like they were kind of scrambling.
Yeah.
Because of the success of WCW, they were kind of scrambling, so they were just throwing all this stuff at the wall.
Yeah.
They even, like I mentioned it before, they even started their own light heavyweight division because the cruiserweights in WCW were so hot.
Yeah.
But it just came off as a cheap imitation. But looking back at the matches now, they actually had some fantastic matches. But
Yeah.
but it just everything that they were doing until they started doing the Russo stuff seemed like it was just kind of a pale imitation.
What if they started doing back to the more like hardcore wrestling instead of, all the adult smut stuff? Got away from the kiddie stuff and started to go more with, the wrestling personality.
I don't know. That's a tough call. I don't know because I mean
They had Michael. They had some workers. They had people that could do it.
Yeah, they did. No, that's what I mean. They definitely did. Maybe they would have had to invest some money and maybe poached a couple people from WCW first. To put on their undercard, and their mid card guys. It's kind of hard to say.
Look at their main events. Like Russo didn't have a whole, whatever their main event, their big matches were extra filtered from a Russo perspective.
Yeah.
That was mostly McMahon and the people who know wrestling and the wrestlers.
Right.
So if Russo wasn't around, maybe they do more of what they were doing with the main event on the undercard, and they didn't have all
That
of
would have
the,
been fantastic.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was
the
waiting.
birthing hands and all this other crap.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I was waiting for them to do, because, like I said, as far as the in ring product went, dismiss the storylines because WCW was not really great. I mean, until the NWO, the first couple of years of the NWO. But as far as like continuing with storylines, they were kind of all
They
over
were
the
both
place.
kind of bad,
But yeah,
except for the main events on WWF.
yeah. But I remember that's what I was waiting for. The in-ring product in WCW, to me, was so much more superior than the undercard and mid-card stuff going on in the WWF. at
Oh
the time.
yeah,
So that's what I was hoping they were going to do. Start competing with them on that level. Start getting some guys, and they were bringing in guys that had the ability to do that, but for whatever reason, it just didn't come off right. They brought in Doug Furness and Phil LaFon. And,
yeah,
guys that could definitely work, but it just didn't come off right.
yeah. A different style.
I don't know what it
you
was.
know?
Yeah, it
They
was
went
like
from
they
Japan
were
to
still.
WWF.
It was like WWF wanted to bring these guys in that could work, but still stick them in the early '90s era WWF or something.
Yeah,
It-
or saddle them
Still
with
have 'em.
stupid interviews and gimmicks and stuff, and it just throws them off.
right.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a that I struggled with that one there, Butch.
All right. What's your next what if?
Okay, what if gosh.
And it,
Okay, here's a good one. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
no. Go ahead.
What if Pro Wrestling USA worked out? This was when
Yeah.
when AWA and some of the NWA territories started. Pro Wrestling USA was the first one on ESPN.
Yes.
That was the conglomeration of those guys. Even if AWA, what if Pro Wrestling USA worked and you were able to have the Super Show, the Super TV show on ESPN going worldwide,
yeah.
instead of all that falling apart and just having the AWA.
Yeah. And this was their answer to the national expansion of WWF.
Yes.
By the
Yep.
way.
Yeah. 1985.
Yeah, that's interesting as well. That because really that's where, going back to the toys, that's where that came from, because you had a Ric Flair figure and you had the Freebirds and you had Abdullah the Butcher,
Fabulous ones.
and the Fabulous Ones, and yeah, so like from that era, that's where they kind of spawned that. Yeah, I mean that would have been fantastic if that would have worked out, I think, and that would have probably given the WWF some real competition right off the bat. Unfortunately, it always goes south when you're
Yeah.
when you're dealing with the different promoters and the different egos. But let's say that did work out. Yeah, I definitely think that they could have given WWF a run for their money.
I think they would have buried him. Not killed him, but that would have been the biggest, because ESPN was growing too at the same time,
Right.
And even at the time, ESPN was sports. Like USA Network was, WWF almost made USA Network.
Yes.
I mean, they had some, this wrestling on there before, Southeastern, the Blanchards. I have that on here.
On
And
USA?
Yeah. Yeah.
They also had Dance Party USA.
Yeah, and they had hockey. But really, ESPN, with that talent that they had in that Pro Wrestling USA show, I think that would have been the number one wrestling, because WWF hadn't got too comic booky and got too far out ahead. They may have, and got the kids and everything, but all the other wrestling fans, they're all gone now. They all went somewhere.
Right.
They still would have had a huge audience, and I think it would have worked. Maybe you wound up having 2 or 3 big companies instead of just one.
Yeah.
Because that was just too much talent. The reach was, ESPN.
Yeah.
You had all those guys able, and they kind of did the same thing with Georgia Championship Wrestling. Somebody from Portland would go wrestle on TBS, get their face out there, and then come back to Portland and they're a bigger name because they're on cable.
Right.
Yeah,
true. Yeah. And like you said, just getting, just that exposure would have been huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
It would have been
I didn't even
cartoons
think about
versus
that. How
sports.
long did that last?
1 year, just about. Not even a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then
you're right.
and then
I mean, it was
just
a little
turned
bit-
into AWA.
I mean, it was
after
still a
that.
little bit before WWF really went the cartoon route, but eventually they would have like lost out to him because yeah, you're right. It's ESPN. They're presenting it more as a sport.
Yeah.
So yeah, that and there was so many big names. I mean, because I don't care. Like you mentioned the Fabulous Ones. Everybody knew the Fabulous Ones.
Yeah.
Even
did.
though they weren't in the WWF,
Yeah.
everybody knew them.
Dusty
Everybody
Rhodes.
knew the Freebirds. Yeah, everybody knew Dusty. Everybody knew Ric Flair, Harley Race, all those guys.
Yeah.
So
I think that would have been great.
yeah, that would have been. That would have been. Let's go back to the Viceland thing. I had already had kind of thought about these questions, but Viceland or this dark side of the ring has kind of covered these. What if David Von Erich hadn't passed away?
He definitely would have been in line for a world title run in the NWA because he was one of the guys. It was him, and they would have 5 or 6 guys that they would maneuver. So if something happened and they needed somebody, they could step in there and be a world champion. He would have been one of those guys. And I do believe they would have, hell, they might have even been in business today because he seemed like the only one that had a strong head on his shoulders, especially for wrestling, not only in the ring, but out of the ring.
Right.
And everybody said that he's so much different than his brothers.
Yeah.
So they could have at least been around a lot longer than they were. I mean, whether somebody would have grabbed them, picked them up, or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, because that was just kind of like the first major blow to world class. David Von Erich to me was easily the best.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a lot of Fritz.
Wasn't the most popular per se.
Right,
but
was not.
really popular though.
But still, right, exactly.
No.
I mean, thinking back, like watching those shows, he was still like super popular.
Yeah.
I mean, but
The girls didn't scream as loud, but they still screamed.
yeah. Kevin and Kerry were probably a little bit more popular as far as that aspect goes. The guys probably maybe favored David a little bit better because he came off more of kind of like the ass
Tough
kicker.
guy, yeah.
Yeah.
His interviews were sweet too. They were a lot better than his brother's interviews were.
Yeah, easily. Right. And I think he definitely would have won the title, the NWA title. I think he probably would have kept it longer than Kerry did.
Yeah.
And like you said, he might have lost it and won it back, and I mean, who knows? But yeah, definitely a major blow to WCCW. They end up giving the belt later on to Kerry at his memorial show. Kerry held it for what, a week, 2 weeks?
Yeah, and it was only
2
designed
weeks.
for that. Yeah.
Lost it in Japan.
50,000 people there at that football stadium for that.
Yeah.
1984.
Right.
Go figure.
Yeah. Heaven needed a champion, Gene.
Yeah.
I mean, basically. Sorry.
Well, really, if David Von Erich had stayed alive, I believe maybe Fritz may have been more open to going and following their TV ratings in New York and wherever they were going.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost unfathomable now for somebody not to do that.
Yeah.
Like, if you have these big ratings in these other markets, why would you not take your wrestling product there?
Yeah, really.
And especially back then when house shows and the arenas were like how they made their money.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just crazy, like, to think that he was just so dead set in the old ways that he would not do that.
I know, but there were a lot of guys like that. I mean,
I know.
so it's kind of like a generational thing.
Right.
It's kind of like how you listen to like the idiots in the media or just maybe some of the morons talking in general there. Talk about why somebody did something or said something in the past. Well, it was a different time,
Yeah, exactly. Right. All right. What's your next what if scenario.
Okay, what if? I kind of mentioned this. What if Southwest Championship Wrestling had been able to stay on the USA Network? Let me set this up a little bit because this is kind of reaching here. Before the WWF got on the USA Network, where they've been for, gosh, I don't know how many years, minus a little spell, Southwest Championship Wrestling out of San Antonio, Joe Blanchard, that group, Tully Blanchard's dad, were on USA Network. And they were on there for about a year. And USA Network was looking for some programming. Southwest Wrestling fit the bill. And they had a nice little run there. It just got too expensive for them, you know, becoming a TV product instead of a house show product. You know, they kind of they got bit in the butt by the changing tides of wrestling coming from, you know, being more of a TV product into a house show product. When you start going on cable thing, it's a different animal.
Right.
But what if they were able to stay on there and the WWF was not on the USA Network? What does the landscape look like there?
Well, that's hard to say because WWF was still. Oh no, I guess not because that was their major market. I mean, that was their major channel, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even their Saturday morning shows were on there. WWF had Tuesday Night Titans on there.
Yeah.
So that would have gotten
Primetime wrestling.
That would have gotten rid of all that. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, who were their major players though? Was it still Adrian Adonis and
Tully?
Bob Orton was already gone.
Hell, Rick Morton was on there, you know, with they had a lot of talent in there. Because I look at it like they kind of would have did what they were doing on TBS.
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of people moved around the territories anyway, but if you got a national exposure, you're going to have shots, somebody coming in from Portland, somebody coming in from Florida or whatever.
Yeah. That could have been interesting. I mean, and now that you say that.
Gino Hernandez was on there.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, the dynamic duo.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now that you mentioned like USA had them, and then they went to WWF later. TBS had multitude. ESPN had theirs. I'm surprised.
Yeah, because this was 82. You know.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that more cable companies, because all these did good ratings. And I'm surprised that that like every cable station back then didn't try to like seek out some sort of wrestling show in the early 80s.
Yeah, really. Oh, I mean, yeah.
Just for
only the
ratings.
sports networks did, really. You know, because the ratings weren't as big of a deal back then as they are now.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, it was more of like something for a particular station or network. It was just a different animal. But yeah, a lot of them tried, and I'm surprised everybody didn't have one. There was such a good ratings, you know, just for selling a commercial spot.
So let's say that they stay on the USA Network. WWF eventually would have found some outlet. They would have found some cable station to be on, I'm sure.
Well, they found TBS eventually.
Well, yeah, let's not talk about that.
Yeah. It's on the list.
We were probably not going to have enough time to get to that one today.
That's a whole show in itself. Almost.
Right. So, yeah, that's an interesting scenario. That would have been cool. I mean, but everybody kind of got picked up, you know, eventually by different places.
I say WCW is the one that killed wrestling territories, not necessarily WWF. But really, you would have had two NWA affiliated territories.
Yeah.
That were on national cable. And granted, the penetration of cable wasn't in every household yet.
Right.
You know, we didn't get cable until 82 probably. Some people 88.
Same with me. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So they would have been well out ahead. And I don't think that the WWF would have been able to get as quickly of a stranglehold.
Yeah.
They had an advantage because they were in huge markets in the Northeast, you know,
right,
and had a lot more money. But you get Texas, and you know, there's a lot of money down there.
Yeah.
Couple different promotions rolling up their sleeves and working together, just like they did with Georgia, GCW. I mean, that was pretty much everybody working together.
Yeah.
Get some guy from Kansas City on the Georgia cable show, and he's a bigger name.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to Kansas City, he's a bigger name. Go to St. Louis, he's bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere.
Right.
I think that maybe would have helped everybody get out in front of what's coming quicker.
Yeah.
So they can figure out what they're doing. And if McMahon tried that, they could punch him in the face and say, okay, try it. But,
yeah, right.
Yeah,
exactly.
So,
yeah.
To me, that was critical.
Yeah.
that Southeastern and then McMahon going on USA Network.
Yeah. All right. This we're running low on time, so this will probably be our last one.
All right.
But since this is kind of like the big one that everybody's talking about on Viceland, like I had mentioned earlier, I have a documentary on it. This has been covered throughout the years quite a bit. But what if Bruiser Brody had not been murdered in 1988?
Oh, by the way, the Viceland Bruiser Brody documentary is out on YouTube. You can find that. So.
Okay, I think they all are. I think all of them that have aired are out there now.
Oh, really? Are they?
I believe so.
Huh.
I could be wrong, but I thought I was looking through it. I thought I saw another one at least.
Oh, wow. Huh. They are pretty good. Well, if Brody had not got, I think he would have helped the independents and smaller ones in some fashion.
So you don't think that WWF would have eventually brought him?
Yeah,
paid him enough money to bring him. Okay.
He would have been the independent guy that he was, and eventually he would have got brought in for a run. I think they could have made some pretty good money with Brody against Hogan or Brody against anybody. He wasn't going to be like a big superstar, but he wasn't going to be the guy that drew the house, but he would be the guy to help the other guy draw the house, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
He would have been he would have stuck around for a little bit. He would have got a bigger name, probably made more money elsewhere. But he would have had a run in the WWF. It would have been a short one. And he would have helped the Japanese companies too, because especially like All Japan, because they started the struggle and wane there. Yeah, the landscape could have, I don't think it would have done much to the landscape, but personally for him and as a fan, you probably would have got to see a few more of the matches that you wanted, like the Hogan and right. Brody.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think, like you say, I think he probably would have came into the WWF for probably a short run. They probably would have started giving him shots at Hogan right off the bat, I think. Kind of like what they did when they brought Wyndham back as the Widowmaker.
Yeah. He was a bigger name, though. Maybe they would have, built that up a little bit. You
think, who was? You think Wyndham was a bigger name than Brody?
No, Brody.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I don't believe at that time that they would have brought him in and just gave him a shot, because he wasn't that big of a name. He wasn't like as big as Dusty. You know what I mean? He was a big name, but not. Maybe they would have a couple house shows to see how it goes, but I don't think it would have been a program right away. It might have taken 2 or 3 months to get there.
You think they would have changed his name, changed his gimmick? I could see them leaving the gimmick.
Sure, slightly. And it wouldn't have mattered
they
because
might have left his name. They might have left his name the same.
Even if they changed
too, but
whatever, Brody,
Yeah.
They had the Berserker.
Well, that's funny that you mentioned that, because not only has John Nord gone on record and saying, well, obviously he was kind of doing Brody.
Yeah.
But he claims that originally he was supposed to come in as tag team partners with Brody.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
That's what he's saying. Anyway. Huh. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, Brody was still young, but he was a little bit older at the time. He'd been around. He probably could have given us quite a few more years, but if he would have gone to WCW instead, I don't know.
So do you think he would have wound up staying with one of the bigger companies? Because I just view him as him getting his and getting out, which would enable him to make more money elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, he made so much money in Japan and he loved Japan. I mean, but yeah, it's tough to say, but I think he would have at least had a run in WWF as the major heel in there.
You
and
think the
probably
top
got
guy,
some shots at Hogan.
top heel?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
I think he would have.
Yeah. Because even if, well, hell, they had the run heels at Hogan. You know, he was almost guaranteed a spot.
Right.
Not that he wasn't good or anything. You know. Yeah.
Well,
he could have made some
especially
money.
at the time. I mean, physically, it's close to a mirror of Hogan at the time.
Except he was a lot better shape.
More so, well, yeah. I mean, more so than the guys that Hogan was kind of beating.
Yeah.
You know, Hogan would always beat like the big, beefy, like monster guys.
Yeah.
That's kind of what he wanted to do.
Duggan versus Brody.
Up until a certain point. Well, in WWF though, that would not have been much.
But I'm just saying, like on
Brody
paper, they would have made it
squashed
work
him.
somehow. You know.
Yeah, but
Brody's not going to squash Duggan.
not a squash. But I just don't think. I mean, Duggan just didn't. By the time Duggan came into WWF, I think he'd resigned himself to the fact that he was not going to have to work hard anymore.
Yeah. Well, right. But if you're in there with Brody, you got to work.
But what's he going to do? I don't know. I mean, I see them just putting, not a squash, but I see them putting Brody over huge against Duggan if they're trying to like build him towards.
Oh yeah,
towards
definitely.
Hogan.
Sure. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So, all right. Interesting discussions. Maybe at some point we will revisit these with some different scenarios. But unfortunately, we're running out of time.
Darn it.
Thank you, Brace Beemer, for being here and your expert analysis as always.
You're welcome. Great job, Mad Dog. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. As always, keep checking the Butch Blood Facebook page for our next show. Hopefully, we'll be here again next week. As always, thank you, everybody that tuned in. And look for the YouTube replays. And take care.
Have a good day, everyone.
Hey! What makes a man? Is it the power in his hair?